All right, everybody. Today I'm out in the hangar and we're going to go over a walk around on a 172. I'm going to show you a couple key things to look for and a good procedure to follow. Make sure you're checking everything properly, and we can help mitigate any errors if we find them on the ground rather than in the air. So let's get started here. Okay, so to start, you always begin with your pre-flight checklist, and it's going to guide you through step by step what you're supposed to be doing. It'll have you take the control locks out, you'll turn the master on, check your fuel gauges, lower your flaps, check the trim wheel movement, make sure that it is free. And then once you're finished the checklist, you can commence with the exterior inspection. I always like to start right on the pilot side here, so I'm just going to close the door. And we're gonna start right here with the landing gear. So we can take a look down the landing gear, make sure that there's no damage there. We wanna check these screws, make sure that they're tight. Moving down to your brakes, you can actually get a look at your brake pads left and right of the disc here, and take a look at the brake disc. We got lots of brakes there, lots of discs, nothing looks unusual. We also wanna take a look at your brake line. Filled with mil 5606. It would be red in color. So if you see a pool of red fluid below your brake, you can pretty easily assume that is brake fluid. Obviously, you're gonna get that looked at if you would find it. Coming onto the tire, we wanna check the inflation of the tire. Some people like to roll the tire forward and back to have a look at the underside, make sure it's not sitting on a flat spot. It's pretty tight in the hangar, so I'm not gonna roll the airplane today. We have a big lug nut here and a cotter pin securing that lug nut. You can see it wrapped around there. So we want to make sure that the cotter pin is in there and we're not going to lose our lug nut. The tire, you're checking for any baldness or that it's not flat. I have a picture of the wear indicator in the tire, and I'm going to post that. I'll pause the video and put that in here to show you what you're looking for as far as wear. This tire looks nice and new. We got lots of tread on it. We have no issue there. From the tire, I like to come up and take a look up at the flaps. So we've lowered the flaps because we want to get a good inspection of the flap track. You don't know who was flying the airplane last. They may have oversped the flaps on our airspeed limitation. So that's what we're looking for on our flap track. You want to make sure that there's no hairline cracks, no bends. Also look at make sure the flap is properly rested on your track, and nut and bolt secured there, and it looks lubricated. Coming into the middle here on the push rod, making sure that there's no damage, and it should have a little bit of play back and forth. One thing you want to check is this little hole here, is try to get a look through there and make sure that you cannot see light through there, as well as that your jam nut is tight. So that all looks good. If you can see light through this little hole, it's going to indicate that your rod is not threaded in far enough to the flap. We'd also look at the nut and bolt here, and the same thing on this flap track over here. So everything looks good. You can come to the other side of the flap, have a look on the top of it, make sure that we have the inspection covers on, give them a little tap and listen. They are good there. Also want to have a feel of the flap. Be very tangible. It should have a little bit of a wiggle to it. If it was very solid or rigid, it could be because of a jam. So maybe your motor's pushing it back too far and you're jamming on the track. So if it's jammed, definitely we're not going to be going flying. We need to get that looked at. Lots of inspection covers on the bottom of the wing. We want to make sure that they're all secure. A little more up front. Up here. All of these are just covers for maintenance to pull off and inspect the interior of the wing. Take a look at the spar and such. Next, we're coming to the aileron. So the aileron, you want to have a look at it. In here, always keep one hand supporting in case the wind was to blow it down. You don't want to pinch your finger, but have a look at the hinge. So there's 3 hinges. Look at the nut and bolts. You can move it back and forth, make sure it's moving freely. Exact same thing on this push rod, looking at the jam nut and the little peep sight. Take a look at the hinge. These actually look like they're nice new hinges. There's no play in them. They're nice and tight. And the third hinge down here. Now on the outside of the ailerons, we have these 3 weights, and they're there to help reduce aileron flutter. So you want to make sure that those weights are in fact there. And then we just have a connection for your static electricity to travel to the static wicks. Be very careful during your walk around that you don't break the static wicks, because it's something that happens fairly common and it should be avoided. Coming to the outside of the wing, you're going to take a look at the structure of the wingtip, make sure it didn't get damaged on the previous flight. You would check the lights if you're flying at nighttime. We're moving to the leading edge of the wing, inspecting for any damage, bird strikes. Coming to the lights, you can have a look inside, making sure everything is normal with the landing and taxi light. Next, we got a stall horn. I'll shine the camera in there, nice and clear. We're just making sure that's not blocked or there's no bug nests inside of our stall horn. Something that could happen during the spring or in the winter time, you know, if it was blocked with snow, something that you're looking to clear out there. We have a tie down ring, and just behind our wing strut is this tube hanging down. It is a fuel vent for the tank. Sometimes if the tanks are over full, you may see fuel coming out of there. That's all right, but you're just checking to make sure it is not blocked, because we need to be able to let air into the fuel tanks as the fuel comes down. Next is the pitot tube. You want to have a look at the front, make sure it's not blocked. And there is also a tiny hole on the rear, right there, to allow for any drainage if there was moisture in there. You want to just make sure that that's not blocked as well. A visual inspection of the pitot tube is suffice. You don't want any dirt or grease from your fingers to get on there, and then that dirt or grease, the grease is going to collect more dust and dirt, and it could cause a blockage. So just a visual inspection on the pitot tube. Moving forward, both of these vents are for fresh cabin air, making sure that they are not blocked. And you can see it does have a filter in there, so that is common. You'll see that in there. Down the side of the fuselage, all looks good. The side here, we have our static port. The same, just a visual inspection, making sure the static port is not blocked. This door on the cowling is for ground power, so the door is closed and it's not gonna come open during flight. We're gonna transition to the nose and the nose wheel here. So taking a look down at the nose wheel, a couple things we wanna check. Here's our linkage where the rudder pedals are gonna connect to the nose wheel. It's gonna help persuade the nose while we are taxiing. So we're making sure that linkage is properly connected. We have a drain hose here for the battery. And then we're looking at the strut. So the chrome, as long as you got about 3 fingers of chrome showing, that's enough pressure in the nose oleo. If that's fully deflated, definitely something that you wanna get checked out. Coming down to the nose wheel tire, there is a nut bolt and a little cotter pin on here to look at. And then we're looking at tire wear and making sure that the tire is not flat. So that's this side of the tire. I'm gonna come back up here and we're coming around to the nose. The propeller, feel free to feel any nicks. Resist turning the prop. Always treat the prop as if it's live, and you would never want to stand in the way of the propeller, so say underneath it or sticking your head under it if you're looking in the cowling. Lots of guys have been hurt over the years from turning the propeller, and maybe the mag lead was busted, it started. So avoiding an accident, always treat it like it's live. In the cowling, I'll get my light in here. You can take a look, make sure that there's no tools left in there from the mechanics. Everybody can make a mistake. We also have the ring gear here where your starter connects. and is going to turn the engine over. And down here, that's your starter. So that's where it's going to engage with the ring gear. And below is going to be an intake for your cabin heat. So that's your cabin heat going around the exhaust and into the cabin to heat up. On the other side, you can get a good look at the alternator belt. So you can feel that belt tension, make sure it's not too loose. Have a look at the belt, make sure it's not only a couple strands holding it together. Otherwise, you're most likely going to have a failure in flight. There's your alternator right there. Coming down to the front, we have the air filter for our air going into the engine to be combusted. So we want to make sure that's not blocked in the winter time with any snow or ice. In the summertime, any debris or FOD. Now coming to the left side of the tire, it would be. We're just checking that same nut and cotter pin and the linkage. Everything is looking good. This is a little oleo to help reduce your nose wheel shimmy. So once again, we do have a nut, bolt, and cotter pin on there. Okay. We do have a tube sticking down here. This guy is a fuel overflow for your auxiliary fuel pump. So if you did see a whole bunch of fuel down there, it could possibly be an issue with the auxiliary fuel pump. Back to the right side of the cowling, we do have a inspection port here. This is going to be for the oil. You could do that now. I tend to like to do it at the end, but you're looking for the minimum oil specified in the POH. At the end, I'll pull that out and have a look at it. We're just checking our air vents here, fresh cabin air, making sure it is not blocked. We do have another cabin air port here. This will open up and then catch ram air. That's controlled inside the cockpit with your cabin air control. Now this side of the wing, we're doing a very similar inspection, but there's a couple less things on it. We still have lots of inspection ports, making sure that they're on. We can inspect our leading edge. Coming over to the lights, you may have noticed that we had this clear guy sticking down here. It's actually a fiber optic that'll bend the light from your nav light down and shine here. So at nighttime from the cockpit, you'll be able to see a little green glow and know that your light is actually working. The other light is your strobe light. Oftentimes on these planes, you'll see pressure cracks drilled out. And here's an example of one here. So this was cracking up from the screw hole, and then it's been drilled out by maintenance. And they've certified it, said that it is good to go. So that's just to help prevent the crack from spreading even further. We're back to the aileron. We got 2 static wicks. We can have a look at our connection. There's our 3 weights. And then we're having a look at the 3 hinges. Making sure everything looks good. Now, on this side is a good spot to watch your ailerons, how they move in opposite directions. You can have a look at the control moving inside the cockpit. And if your aileron is up, the control should be pointing towards you. So that's a good time to have a look, make sure that the controls are hooked up properly. And then I'll just put those back at neutral. Onto the flap, same inspection. We have a little wiggle, which is good. And having a look at our flap tracks. Everything looks very well maintained. Down to the tire, we got our cotter pin, no flat spots, good pressure, brake line, brakes are looking good. Okay, now coming back to the empennage. Once again, here's a good chance to look at your antennas. So on the top, we have the domes, which are your GPS. The silver probe is your outside air temperature. And then we have COM1 and COM2 sticking up. Back here is our ELT antenna, kind of indicated by this sticker here. So you want to make sure that those antennas are there and there's no damage to them. On the belly, we also have an antenna. That's the transponder on the fin. And then back here is called the marker beacon, not used very often in Canada. So coming to the empennage, you're looking at your horizontal stabilizer. You're looking at the vertical stabilizer, making sure there's no damage to the leading edges. No ice in the winter time. And then on your elevator, just be careful for those static wicks again. We're inspecting our hinge point. So we can see the connection here for our static, and we're looking at the nut and bolt on the elevator. Same within the middle. And here's our trim tab connection. So you can see nut, bolt, cotter pin. There's your trim tab. And on the bottom, we also have another one there that we're checking at. And I'm moving that elevator up and down. It moves nice and freely. You know, once is plenty. It looks good. Up top, we have the antenna sticking off of the vertical stabilizer. From this angle, it looks like a V, and that's your VOR antenna. For the rudder, we're looking at the 3 hinge points here once again. Looking good, looking good. And down underneath, this is a really good spot to look for your rudder connection. We have cotter pins, everything's connected properly. You can move the rudder from the bottom to the stops, and it's looking good. You can have a look at the tail tie down. If that's bent or broken off, that's going to indicate that person before you possibly had a tail strike. So something to look for there. When you're moving the elevator, very important that you do not move it by your rudder trim. So this rudder trim tab is set by the mechanics, and you'll notice generally it is at a bend from your rudder. This is supposed to be the case to help with our unwanted causes of yaw. So do not bend that tab. If it's bent, we don't want it to be bent straight. And don't move the rudder with that tab because you will bend it. We're having a look on the other side of our elevator at our hinge points. Okay, so that is pretty well the exterior. I'm just gonna walk around to the other side. I can't get by that. The only thing left to do is to check our oil. So we check our oil quantity, ensure that it is at least above the POH minimum. And we want to dip the tanks to make sure we have sufficient fuel. You never want to test the gauges. So I'm just going to grab our dipstick and we'll get the walk around finished. Okay, so we're up here on top of the wing. I have the dipstick here. We have our trusty wooden stick. I'm going to take off the cap, and we want to make sure we're wearing that rope. We don't want to drop this in. Now, the 172 to dip the tank, you want to go to the back of the hole and straight down. And you can see right here, I'm actually hitting part of the wing structure, and it's not all the way down. But if you go back a little more, it'll drop down into a little measuring spot. That's where you want to be measuring from. And then you're bringing it up and you're just checking the dampness on the tank. For here, it's sitting about 5/8 above. I've dipped the other tank. It's indicating the same. And it's really good habit to figure that out into an endurance. So we're 5/8. I'll be conservative and call it half. That's 26 gallons. If this engine's burning about 10 gallons an hour, I know conservatively I have 2.5 hours of fuel on board. So easy to do, something you should make consistent when you go flying. Next step, we're gonna strain our fuel and look for contamination. We also wanna make sure it's blue because we're burning 100 low lead. So we have 5 ports on each wing. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's also 3 on the belly, 1 at the front in that hole, and then 2 at the back, you can see right here. So 3 on the belly and 5 on the opposite wing. So these 172s have a total of 13 spots to strain for the fuel. I have a picture of some contamination that I've previously found, and I'll put that picture up to show you what you're looking for. But really, if we're gonna strain the fuel out, I always hold it up to the light, and it makes that view a little easier for you. But it's nice and clean. There's no bubbles in the bottom. And here's that picture of what the contamination may look like if you were to find it. Alrighty guys, so that's it for the walk around. I hope you felt you learned something from it. I'm also going to link 2 videos that a friend of mine have made about the aircraft systems as far as the electrical and the fuel system. So I'll link those videos on the screen and have a look at them. They're helpful for understanding our systems.